The summer of 1944. Europe held its breath, watching the grandiose events unfold. After the resounding success of the Normandy landings, which opened the Western Front, the Allies had no intention of stopping. Their gaze was fixed on southern France. There, where the gentle Mediterranean Sea meets French soil, a new chapter of the war was to unfold. Operation Dragoon, that's what it was called. It was to be the second blow that would crush Nazi Germany, accelerate the liberation of all France, and perhaps change the course of history. This was not just a military operation. It was a strategic turning point that would forever alter the map of Europe and the destinies of millions. The idea of landing in the south of France, like a seed sown in the fertile soil of strategic planning, originated back in 1943. At that time, when the outcome of the war was still far from obvious, the Allies were already thinking big, building a general picture of the liberation of Europe. Initially, this operation was codenamed Anvinval. The idea was grandiose, a simultaneous strike from the north, across the English Channel, and from the south, across the Mediterranean. This was supposed to be a double blow that would shatter the German defenses, like steel on an anvil. However, as often happens in military affairs, reality made its adjustments. The lack of landing craft, ships, barges, specialized equipment, became the stumbling block that forced the postponement of Anvil. Priority was given to Normandy, Operation Overlord. And so, when the Northern Front was already ablaze, the idea of a southern landing again became relevant, receiving a new, more dynamic name: Dragoon. But even after the operation was postponed, the disputes did not subside. The American and British commands, two mighty pillars of the Allied coalition, fiercely debated its advisability until the last moment. Each side had its arguments, its visions of the further course of the war, and each decision was made with great difficulty, passing through the crucible of the most heated discussions. The decision to launch Operation Dragoon, the second blow against Nazi Germany, was not an easy one for the Allies. It was a true tangle of contradictions, with the unyielding Winston Churchill on one side and the resolute Franklin Roosevelt on the other. Two titans of world politics, each with their own vision for the future of Europe, each convinced of their own righteousness. Churchill, with his deep understanding of geopolitics and perhaps a slight taste of imperial ambitions, was vehemently against a landing in southern France. His gaze was fixed on the Balkans. He saw there not only an opportunity to strike at the soft underbelly of the Reich, but also a chance to prevent the strengthening of Soviet influence in post-war Eastern Europe. From his perspective, advancing through Italy and then into the Balkans was a more logical, more strategically advantageous move. This would allow the Allies to seize key positions, preempting the Red Army, and possibly avoid the division of Europe into spheres of influence. His arguments were convincing, supported by years of experience and political acumen. He painted pictures of a future where the Balkans became a barrier against communism, and the Mediterranean a zone of British influence. But the Americans, led by Roosevelt, had completely different plans. Their main goal was the speedy end of the war in Europe, not post-war geopolitical games. They insisted on a landing in southern France. Their arguments were pragmatic and straightforward. Opening a new front would draw significant German forces away from the Normandy direction, facilitate the advance of the main Allied armies, and, no less importantly, ensure control over major Mediterranean ports, such as Marseille and Toulon. These ports were vitally necessary for supplying the enormous army that had already landed in Normandy and was preparing to push deep into France. Without them, logistics would turn into a nightmare, slowing down the entire offensive. For the Americans, the main thing was to strike the Germans where it was most effective and as quickly as possible. They saw Dragoon not just as a tactical operation, but as a strategic tool capable of accelerating the collapse of the Third Reich. The debates were heated, at times escalating into open confrontations between the leaders. Churchill even threatened to resign if his plan was not adopted. He referred to Operation Dragoon as nothing less than a stab in the back to his Balkan strategy. Roosevelt, in turn, displayed uncharacteristic firmness, understanding that delay or abandonment of Dragoon could cost thousands of lives and prolong the war by months. Ultimately, after long weeks of debates, discussions, and diplomatic maneuvers, the American viewpoint prevailed. The decision to launch Operation Dragoon was made. This was the result not only of military necessity, but also of a complex diplomatic compromise, where each leader had to concede something. Churchill, albeit with great difficulty, accepted defeat in this dispute, understanding that Allied unity was more important than personal strategic preferences. Thus, through the crucible of the most heated discussions, the future was paved for a new, decisive chapter in the liberation of France. So, while the Allied command argued and diplomats sought compromises, a completely different reality unfolded in southern France. August 1944. On the Mediterranean coast, from the Pyrenees to the Alps, the German Army Group G was positioned, commanded by General Johannes Blaskowitz. This was an impressive force, about 250,000 men. But, as is often the case, numbers are deceiving. Despite their numerical strength, these troops were far from the Wehrmacht's elite. Most of the combat-ready units had been transferred to the Eastern Front, where the Red Army was delivering devastating blows, or to the Western Front, in Normandy, where the Allies had already established a foothold. The divisions remaining here, though numerous, suffered from a chronic shortage of experienced soldiers, modern equipment, and, most importantly, morale. Tanks were extremely scarce compared to what the Allies could field. Air support was practically non-existent. The sky over France belonged unequivocally to Allied aircraft. These troops were spread over a vast territory. Their main task was to defend the coast from a possible landing and suppress the growing French resistance. They were ready for defense, but not for a large-scale offensive. Their fortifications, although built, could not compare to the Atlantic Wall. It was a stretched and largely outdated defense, held together more by fear and discipline than by actual power. A completely different picture emerged for the Allies. They were not just preparing for a landing, they were assembling a true punishing fist. The 6th Army Group, the core of which consisted of the American 7th Army, commanded by General Alexander Patch, and the French 1st Army, led by General Jean de Lattre de Tassigny. This was a powerful, well-equipped, and motivated grouping. The Americans, already hardened in battles in North Africa and Italy, possessed vast experience in amphibious operations and rapid breakthroughs. French units, many of which consisted of soldiers from North African colonies, were burning with desire to liberate their homeland. This was not just an army. It was the rebirth of French military might. Air support was overwhelming. Hundreds of aircraft, fighters, bombers, transports were ready to unleash a barrage of fire on the enemy and ensure air superiority. And of course, a mighty fleet, landing ships, destroyers, cruisers, battleships, hundreds of pennants, ready to support the landing with the fire of their guns and land thousands of soldiers on enemy shores. Overall command of this armada was entrusted to General Alexander Patch, a man who had already proven his competence in previous campaigns. Thus, on the eve of Operation Dragoon, the forces were extremely unequal. On one side, a stretched, weakened German defense, with limited resources and low motivation. On the other, a powerful, well-coordinated, and decisive Allied strike force, ready to descend upon the southern coast of France. This disproportion of forces heralded a swift and, possibly, rapid outcome. But before the landing, there remained another, no less important phase. A hidden war that was to prepare the ground for the main strike. But before the cannons roared and waves of landing troops surged ashore, another, no less dramatic battle unfolded. A battle of shadows, sabotage, and subversion. Several weeks before August 15, 1944, when Operation Dragoon was set to begin, southern France transformed into a veritable beehive of activity. Here, deep behind enemy lines, French resistance fighters and Allied special forces intensified their operations. This was a hidden war, where every railway track, every bridge, every communication line became a battlefield. German garrisons, scattered across towns and villages, were under constant attack. Night raids on depots, sudden assaults on patrols, destruction of equipment. All this kept the occupying forces in a state of constant tension. The goal was not merely to inflict damage, but to sow chaos, divert attention, and force the Germans to disperse their already limited forces. French partisans, many of whom were local residents, knew every ravine, every path. They were the eyes and ears of the Allies, gathering invaluable intelligence on troop numbers, their movements, the location of defensive structures. This data, transmitted by radio or through liaisons, formed the basis of strategic operational plans. Parallel to the resistance's actions, Allied aircraft launched massive strikes. These were not indiscriminate bombings. Each target was carefully chosen. Railway junctions, bridges, fuel and ammunition depots, radar stations. The objective was crystal clear: to isolate the future landing zone, to cut off all supply and retreat routes, to deprive the Germans of the ability to quickly transfer reinforcements, to ensure that on D-Day, the enemy would be disoriented and cut off from the main body of their troops. This was not just preparation. It was a meticulous effort to create the conditions for success. Every act of sabotage, every supply drop from the sky for the partisans, every reconnaissance flight, all of it brought closer that very day when the Mediterranean Sea would once again witness landing soldiers, but this time, liberators. Finally, the morning of August 15, 1944, arrived, a day that would go down in history as another D-Day. The Mediterranean Sea, usually gentle and calm, this time witnessed a grand spectacle. A large-scale amphibious operation began even before dawn, when hundreds of aircraft appeared over the coast between Toulon and Cannes. First, in that pre-dawn hour, paratroopers and glider troops descended from the heavens. These were elite units, whose task was to capture key points in the enemy's rear, disrupt communications, and create chaos. In pitch darkness, they landed deep within enemy territory, engaging in unequal combat with disoriented German garrisons. Their audacious actions were intended to pave the way for the main forces, create beachheads for further advance, and sow panic. Holding their breath, they awaited the signal to strike the first blow. And then, with the first rays of the sun, the sea churned. The sky was lit up by flashes of gunfire. The Allied fleet, consisting of hundreds of ships, opened powerful artillery fire on coastal fortifications. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers. This entire armada unleashed tons of metal on German positions, destroying bunkers, suppressing firing points, and clearing the way for the naval landing. Under the cover of this intense fire, thousands of landing craft headed for the shore. Soldiers, gripping their weapons, prepared for the final assault. Despite German fortifications, anti-landing obstacles, and minefields, the first day of the operation passed with fewer casualties than expected. The element of surprise, powerful artillery preparation, and coordinated actions allowed the Allies to establish a foothold on the coast. This was just the beginning, but a promising beginning. The first step towards the liberation of southern France had been taken. The first rays of the August sun had barely touched the French coast, but the Allies had already secured their foothold. Within the first 24 hours of Operation Dragoon, They managed to achieve what seemed impossible: to breach the main line of German defense. The beachhead, which yesterday had been merely a dot on the map, now stretched up to 10 kilometers deep, methodically expanding with each passing hour. This was not just a territorial gain, it was a confident step towards liberation. 3 American divisions, the 3rd, the 36th, and the 45th, acted in a coordinated and decisive manner. Alongside them, shoulder to shoulder, fought French commandos, whose bravery and local knowledge were invaluable. They advanced forward, step by step, kilometer by kilometer, reclaiming every piece of land from the enemy. The battles were fierce, especially in strategically important points such as Saint-Raphael and Le Dremont. Every house, every street turned into a miniature fortress, which the Germans clung to with their last strength. But despite stubborn resistance, the weakness of the German defense became increasingly apparent. They lacked sufficient soldiers, heavy equipment, and most importantly, reserves to stop this growing tide. The absence of reinforcements that could have turned the tide of battle proved fatal for the Wehrmacht. The Allies, on the contrary, felt a surge of strength. The success of the first day was inspiring, instilling confidence in their actions. With every position reclaimed, with every enemy defeated, they drew closer to their main goal. This was not just a military success, it was a psychological blow to the German command, which well understood that it was losing the initiative. And although heavy fighting still lay ahead, the breach of the coastal defenses became a harbinger of future victories, opening the way deeper into the country and bringing closer the liberation of France. Amidst all this chaos and triumph, the First French Army was destined to play a special role. Under the command of the charismatic General Jean de Lattre de Tassigny, these soldiers didn't just go into battle, they were returning home. For many of them, especially those from the North African colonies, this was not just a military operation, but a deeply personal mission. Their motivation was boundless: to liberate the motherland, to erase the shame of the 1940 defeat, to restore France's honor and dignity. These people, consumed by a thirst for vengeance and a yearning for freedom, were ready for anything. Their fighting spirit, tempered in battles in North Africa and Italy, was like fire. Every offensive, every assault became an act of retribution. And this inner fire manifested brightly in the battles for Toulon and Marseille. These cities, major ports on the Mediterranean Sea, were not just strategic objectives. They were symbols of French grandeur, occupied by the enemy. The liberation of Toulon and Marseille had not only colossal military, but also deep symbolic significance. For the French soldiers, it was a return to their origins, a restoration of justice, a triumphant return to their native land. In every step, in every shot, this powerful, indomitable will to win was felt. This was their war, their chance to write a new page in the history of France, a page full of courage and pride. Against the backdrop of this triumphant Allied advance, the German command found itself facing a truly existential dilemma. The powerful offensive unfolding in southern France came as a shock, compounded by events in Normandy. Hitler's gamble, as if caught in a trap, wavered between two mutually exclusive decisions. On one hand, the Führer, as always, demanded that positions be held at all costs, no retreat. His orders, detached from reality, prescribed steadfastness to the last man, not allowing for the thought of withdrawal. On the other hand, the generals on the ground understood. It was necessary to preserve the troops. Every soldier counted, for the threat now loomed not only over France but over Germany itself. To lose these forces would mean weakening the Reich's defense to a critical level. Army Group G, under the command of General Blaskowitz, found itself between a hammer and an anvil. The choice was made in favor of preserving combat effectiveness. Without directly obeying the Führer's fanatical orders, they began a systematic retreat. Their path lay north, along the picturesque Rhone Valley, with a single goal: to avoid encirclement and unite with the few forces that still remained in central France. This was not a flight, but a desperate attempt to save themselves, regroup, and perhaps offer resistance. But every kilometer of this retreat turned into a real hell. The sky, belonging entirely to the Allies, unleashed a hail of fire upon the Wehrmacht columns. Attack aircraft continuously assaulted, turning roads into fiery traps, destroying equipment and personnel. And from the ground, from the forests and villages, French partisans did their deadly work. For them, the Germans were not just a retreating enemy, but occupiers, for whom the time of reckoning had come. Ambushes, sabotage, attacks on rear units, every step turned into a deadly lottery. It was a retreat full of blood, sweat, and despair, where every turn in the road could be the last. German soldiers had to not just withdraw but fight for every meter, trying to break out of the pincers that tightened with each passing day. The key objective of Operation Dragoon from the very beginning was not just the liberation of territories, but the capture of two giant maritime gateways to the Mediterranean, Toulon and Marseille. These were not mere cities, but strategic hubs whose significance for the supply of Allied troops was absolutely critical. Without these ports, the entire logistics of the operation, and indeed of the entire Western Front, would have been jeopardized. And so, a few days after the landing, when the beachhead was securely established, the time came for the First French Army, led by General de Lattre de Tassigny, to fulfill its main mission. They surrounded both cities, preparing for an assault that promised to be incredibly fierce. The German garrisons, despite the general retreat, understood the strategic importance of these ports. They were prepared to fight to the last. The Germans offered particularly stubborn resistance in the forts surrounding Toulon. These ancient fortifications, reinforced with modern artillery and machine gun nests, became veritable impregnable fortresses. French soldiers literally had to gnaw their way through every meter of ground, breaking through concrete and steel. Street fighting was merciless. Every house, every street, became an arena for a deadly struggle. In Marseille, the situation was similar. The central districts of the city, with their narrow streets and dense buildings, were ideal for defense. The Germans turned them into a labyrinth of barricades and firing points, where every turn could be the last. But the French soldiers, driven not only by orders but also by a deep sense of revenge for years of occupation, did not retreat. They stormed block after block, dislodging the enemy from every hiding place. By August 28th, just 2 weeks after the start of the operation, both cities were completely liberated. This victory was not only a colossal military success that resolved the problem of supplying Allied troops for the long term, but also an incredible psychological triumph. The liberation of Toulon and Marseille became a vivid symbol of France's rebirth and a powerful signal to the whole world. The Allies are advancing, and nothing can stop them. After Toulon and Marseille fell, and the German coastal defenses were breached, the Allies did not delay. The euphoria of the initial victories quickly gave way to calculated determination. Their main goal now was a rapid advance northward, to prevent retreating German divisions from regrouping and entrenching themselves on new lines. American and French units, hardened in battle, transformed into a relentless pursuing force. Their task was clear: to cut off the enemy's escape routes in the Rhone Valley, vital to the Germans. This wide river valley was the main artery through which Army Group G was trying to break out of the trap, and the Allies were determined to sever this artery. The sky, as before, belonged entirely to Allied aviation. This was a true nightmare for the retreating German columns. Dive bombers and ground attack aircraft, like birds of prey, attacked relentlessly. Roads, clogged with trucks, tanks, and infantry, turned into fiery traps. Every kilometer of the path was marked by burning equipment and soldiers' bodies. Hundreds of planes dropped bombs and strafed with machine gun fire, inflicting heavy losses on the Germans and sowing panic. the morale of the already broken German soldiers plummeted with every raid. But it wasn't just aviation dealing the blows. Allied tank units, with overwhelming superiority in armored vehicles, conducted deep raids. They did not engage in protracted battles with pockets of resistance, but bypassed them, like water flowing around a stone, striving to get behind the enemy. These rapid breakthroughs created a constant threat of encirclement for German units, which were already disoriented and demoralized. Each day brought new reports of captured cities, destroyed columns, and thousands of prisoners. Southern France turned into a vast hunting ground, where the hunters were the Allies and the prey was the retreating German divisions. It seemed that German resistance was melting away before their eyes, and every hour brought closer the moment when the two mighty pincers of the Allied armies, advancing from the north and the south, would close, sealing the enemy's fate. Against the backdrop of the relentless advance of the Allies from the south and west, one of the key objectives of Operation Dragoon was not merely the liberation of territories, but also the establishment of contact between two powerful armies. This was meant to symbolize unity and the effective completion of the gigantic pincer movement that was squeezing German forces in France. And so, on September 12, 1944, a historic event occurred that forever entered the annals of the Second World War. The vanguard units of the legendary American Third Army, led by the no less legendary General George Patton, met with reconnaissance units of the 7th Army near Dijon. This was not just a handshake on the battlefield. This was a moment that had been awaited for months, the moment when two great operations, Overlord and Dragoon, finally merged, creating a single, insurmountable front. This symbolic event held colossal significance. It meant the effective encirclement of significant enemy forces in southwestern France, depriving them of the ability to maneuver and retreat. Now the Germans found themselves trapped between two advancing armies, and their fate was sealed. This also led to the creation of a single and continuous front, which stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the Swiss border, closing any loopholes for the retreating Wehrmacht. French soil, recently occupied by the enemy, was now almost completely liberated, and the Allies stood on the threshold of the final thrust to the borders of Germany. This was a victory not only on the battlefield, but also a victory of strategic planning, endurance, and an unyielding will for freedom. While the main Allied forces, like a mighty river, swiftly streamed northward, leaving liberated lands in their wake, a part of the First French Army, led by its general Delattre de Tassigny, undertook a special mission. Their path lay eastward, into those very regions that had so long languished under the enemy's boot: Provence, the impregnable Alps, and the border with Italy. This was a task no less important than a swift breakthrough, but one that demanded a completely different approach. Here, amidst rocky peaks and winding mountain trails, the main protagonists were not tank columns, but mountain riflemen. These fighters, accustomed to harsh conditions, possessed unique skills for combat in difficult terrain. Every ledge, every peak, became a strategic position for them. Their unseen allies were the local resistance, which, like a circulatory system, permeated these lands. The local inhabitants, who knew every pass, every secret trail, were invaluable guides and scouts. They pointed out camouflaged German positions, helped bypass traps, and set up sudden ambushes. This was a war of small groups, where every fighter counted, and knowledge of the terrain meant more than numerical superiority. The battles here were particularly fierce. The Germans, retreating from the depths of France, tried to entrench themselves on the natural defensive lines of the Alps, turning mountain passes into impregnable fortresses. They understood that these mountains were their last chance to delay the Allied advance and retain some foothold on the border with Italy. But the French mountain riflemen, supported by local partisans, squeezed out the enemy step by step. They bypassed positions, launched flanking attacks, acting boldly and decisively. By the end of September, little more than a month after the start of Operation Dragoon, the entire southern coast of France, including the strategically important port of Nice, was completely liberated. The German troops, having suffered a crushing defeat, were finally pushed into the high mountain regions on the Franco-Italian border, where they were to wage a desperate but already hopeless struggle. This was not just a military victory, it was a return to the origins, the restoration of control over lands that held immense economic and symbolic significance for France. Amidst this triumphant procession of the Allies through southern France, one of the most striking and perhaps least noticeable to the general public, yet critically important for the entire war's progress, was the battle for logistics. The liberation of Toulon and Marseille, these two colossal Mediterranean sea gates, was not merely a military victory, but a true logistical miracle. By mid-September, just a few weeks after the landing, these ports, recently choked with debris and mines, were already handling up to 1/3 of all supplies needed for Allied forces in France. This was an incredible achievement that eased the strained supply lines through Normandy, where the ports of Cherbourg and Le Havre were barely coping with the flow of thousands of tons of ammunition, food, fuel, and equipment. Engineer units, brave and tireless, worked around the clock, without pause. Their labor was heroic, but often overshadowed by more spectacular battles. They cleared the rubble left by the retreating Germans, who had methodically destroyed port infrastructure. Sappers, risking their lives, demined the waters, pulling out hundreds of mines capable of sending another transport to the bottom at any moment. Docks, cranes, railway tracks, and bridges, destroyed by bombing and sabotage, were restored. Every rebuilt meter of track, every restored bridge brought victory closer. Thanks to their titanic efforts, a reliable and extensive supply system was created, which became the circulatory system for the further advance into Germany. Without this logistical success, the rapid advance of the Allies would have been impossible, and the war could have dragged on for many months. Operation Dragoon. This name, like a shadow, often remains overshadowed by the more famous and louder Normandy landings. It doesn't appear as often in history textbooks and documentaries, but its strategic importance is hard to overstate. Imagine the scene. All of Europe is ablaze, and every blow against the Wehrmacht counts. Quote, was precisely such a blow, opening another front in France, completely unexpected by the Germans. This second front, like a punch to the gut, significantly accelerated the defeat of German forces. Instead of concentrating all their forces in one direction, the Germans had to disperse them, transferring divisions from east to west, from north to south, weakening defenses on all fronts. This was not just a tactical advantage, it was a strategic knockdown. Furthermore, the operation ensured complete control over the Mediterranean coast of France. And this meant not only the liberation of key ports such as Marseille and Toulon, but also the creation of reliable logistical routes through which the Allies could unhinderedly transfer reinforcements and supplies. Without these ports, the entire campaign in Western Europe could have dragged on for many months or even years, but, quote, did more. It created the preconditions for an offensive in southern Germany, opening a direct path for the Allied armies to the heart of the Reich. This was an important step in the overall strategy to encircle and finally defeat the Nazi machine. For France itself, the liberation of the south of the country was not just a military success. It was a crucial stage in the restoration of national sovereignty. After 4 years of occupation, when the country was humiliated and divided, every liberated city, every village, returned to the French their faith in themselves and in their future. And, no less importantly, the active participation of French troops in Operation Dragoon, especially the 1st French Army under the command of Delattre de Tassigny, strengthened the country's position among the Allies. This allowed de Gaulle and his government to firmly assert their rights in the post-war settlement, ensuring France a worthy place at the winners' table. Thus, Dragoon is not just another operation. It was a key element in the mosaic of victory, which played its indispensable role in bringing closer the end of World War II and shaping the post-war world order.